Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are on this beautiful planet of ours. Welcome to Sustainability in Your Ear, the podcast conversation about accelerating the transition to a sustainable, carbon neutral society. I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe. Thanks for joining the conversation today. It's going to be a very interesting one. Experts have increasingly linked environmental factors to the rising incidence of childhood illness, including developmental and behavioral disorders. For example, exposure to pesticides, particularly organophosphate pesticides, has been linked to an increase in attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, and reduced cognitive function in children. The exposure to all the chemicals that we've introduced into the environment is hurting our children. And our guest today, David Steinman, is an environmental activist, investigative journalist, and author who has worked to expose the danger of chemical toxins in everyday life. Steinman's best-selling book, Diet for a Poisoned Planet, highlighted the hidden chemical dangers in our food, and in his latest book, Raising Healthy Kids, Protecting Your Children from Hidden Chemical Toxins, he examines how everyday products contribute to this health crisis and offers practical advice for parents to reduce their children's exposure to those hidden dangers. We need to create a safer environment for the next generation, and his book explores the role of nature in developing personality and as an antidote for some of the harms chemicals cause in childhood. It's a useful guide for parents and grandparents seeking advice to provide a safe and stimulating lifestyle for the next generation. You can find David Steinman's Raising Healthy Kids on Amazon.com or at Powell's.com. We'll be right back to talk to David after this quick commercial break. Welcome to the show, David. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I hope you are too.
Well, thanks. I am. I know you're experiencing some extreme heat in Southern California. We are here in Southern Oregon as well. I hope you get through it. The book's fascinating, and I want to ask I think the question that encapsulates the whole thing, which is childhood safe for kids in the 21st century?
Is it safe? It can be safe, but we parents are dealing with issues and challenges of a modern society that we've never seen before, from sending our kids off to school and wondering if they're going to come home
Mm-hmm.
because of gun violence, and then wondering if they're going to get sick now or later from chemical violence. That is, chemicals that could be in their drinking water at
Mm-hmm.
school, chemicals that could affect them when give them a greater risk of cancer. Childhood can still be safe,
Uh-huh.
but we, as modern parents, it's up to us to be aware. Safe immediately,
Mm-hmm.
okay, but what about safe in the terms of, well, my kid's not going to get into the college that they wanted, and they lost 5 to 7 IQ points during pregnancy because mom was using the cosmetics with so much phthalate. Safe, but what if as they get older they can't reproduce, they're subfertile because microplastics interfered with their testosterone production in boys.
Mm-hmm.
So safe is kind of a weird word. Maybe they won't die tomorrow, but maybe we need to be more aware to give them the full human potential in the 21st century that they deserve.
I think you're right that using the word safe is a challenge, but it is the assumption that most of us make about life. You're calling out a really interesting point, which is that we've actually manipulated the environment to such a degree that there are new dangers everywhere and that you need to be aware of as a parent. So, what's your advice to a parent about maintaining a level perspective and making good decisions in the face of so much new information? How should they decide to parent differently in order to ensure that they address all these challenges that their child may face?
As parents, and I count myself in that group, we need to be aware of hidden chemical toxins that are impacting our kids' lives from conception all the way through their lives. And
Mm-hmm.
as parents, we want to build the healthiest foundation for our kids. Because getting back to the word safe, maybe our kids are safe, but what we're doing is making the community unsafe someplace else for other kids. So just as an example, let's say you're just something random. Let's say you're
Mm-hmm.
buying a mouse pad or a wetsuit. Both of these may be made out of a rubber called neoprene.
Right.
Okay, you don't think much of it when you buy that mouse pad, or maybe you're a surfer in Oregon or California and you're buying a wetsuit. I guess if you're in Oregon, you're going to be buying an extra thick wetsuit. It's a little colder there. The neoprene is being made at a plant in Louisiana called in a place called Cancer Alley that's right next to a school called Fifth Ward School. And the kids there are breathing chloroprene, which is being used to make neoprene. So we may make decisions here that are relatively safe, but are very unsafe for other kids. And I think one of the things that we're learning as a society, after 10 years of politicians trying to divide us, what I think one of the things that is so important when we talk about safe or what parents need to know is we're a community,
Mhm.
we as Americans, and we should be making decisions that are not only safe for our own kids, but that are safe for other kids and other families throughout America. And I think that's a really important thing for parents to know. In the book, I try to make folks black belts in protecting yourself from chemical toxins. And there are so many things you can do and should do. Also, I would say to parents, feel empowered, don't despair. Learning to protect yourself from chemical toxins is like taking a college course. You do it, you've taken it, it will be with you the rest of your life.
Do you think that one of the things that a parent should be thinking about and potentially advocating for is more regulation generally in order to be, at the minimum, to be alerted about the potential impact, health and social, to your point about Cancer Alley, of whatever they're going to buy?
Yeah, that's such a great point, Mitch. We are told, I was just going shopping, for example, to get some new flooring for our home. And you look at, well, do I get vinyl? Do I get wood, composite, hardwood? And you realize we have no idea what's in these products. Like we don't know if it's going to off-gas formaldehyde. In the book, I try to help you to work your way through this. But then you're asking about regulation, and I would say, what regulation? One of the
Right.
myths is that government is really not doing an adequate job at protecting us. Oftentimes, these great laws that we pass, like the Substances Control Act, Toxic Substances Control Act, or TSCA, which was passed in 1976 and then updated again recently, there's a lot of commotion and motion. But in the end, the chemicals are still there. We have 8,000 or so forever chemicals being used. EPA is monitoring about 6 or 8 of them in the drinking
Yeah.
water and has banned none of them. So regulations, what regulations? That's the first thing parents have to be aware of is there is no backstop. It's up to you. It's the Wild West to protect your children.
Yeah, and Tosca is a great example of this. I mean, there are 11 or 12,000 new chemicals registered with Tosca annually. We don't hear about it. We don't hear about the ones that are dangerous, the ones that are potentially benign. We're not even sure they're benign. And there are then hundreds of thousands of other chemicals, new chemicals being used that aren't registered because they're never actually applied to the product itself, but it's used somewhere in the system that produces the product. You're absolutely right. So, how do you, when you think about these kinds of hidden threats, let me run through a couple of questions. What common food additives should I look for today in my child's breakfast, for instance, that I should avoid?
Well, that's a great question. The big ones would be food dyes. Then you would have preservatives like BHT, BHA, but also, for example, to make things simpler, if you buy organic foods, you don't have to always know all the details. Like people will say, well, I avoid GMO foods, genetically modified organism foods. And that would be another thing to avoid. A lot of the cereals are made from GMO. But if you get organic is the real thing, then you don't need to know every detail about every toxin because organic is such a protective way of going. And people might, there's a lot of cynicism, no kidding, on the internet.
Mm.
And people will tell you organic is fake, it's not worth it, it's just too much money. But I've looked at the studies of conventionally sourced foods like cereal, fruits, vegetables, and organically sourced. And I've looked at the studies showing what's in them, and then it's studies showing that when kids are put on organic diets, how their health improves. So if you go organic, then when you give your kids cereal, there's a lot of stuff that will happen that's good for them. Probiotic, their beneficial bacteria in their gut will be much improved. Their behavior will be improved. See, some of the things you can't see in cereal. Every cereal in America that isn't organic is sprayed with a nerve toxin called organophosphate pesticides. Every single cereal. That's because in conventionally sourced foods, especially grains, the grains are always sprayed with like malathion or other acephate or other organophosphates routinely, and these show up in the cereal. Roundup is another example of a chemical that will be found in larger amounts in non-organic foods. This won't be on the label. So this is the kind of stuff where if you go organic from the start, you will avoid these hidden chemical toxins. But I would say food dyes, food additives like BHA, BHT are some of the things listed on the label that if you see those for sure, you know to avoid that cereal product.
So can you explain what the long-term impacts of BHT and BHA are on the child's body, so that we have some context for that?
Yeah, as marker chemicals, these have carcinogenic properties, but more to the point, they are markers for just a badly done product. Because if a product has cereal, for example, has BHA or BHT, or say food dyes, food dyes are associated really clearly with hyperactive behavior. I mean, if you wonder why your kid is acting out, look at the food dyes in their Jello that they may get at school, that green stuff that jiggles. You want to avoid those, but they're really marker chemicals for an inferior product. When kids have high levels of organophosphates in their urine, in their bodies, and they measure it, and the scientists measure it in their urine. Over time, they're at risk for ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Particularly, exposure can reduce their IQ, their IQ. Studies have been done showing that children with high exposure to these organophosphate pesticides, especially during pregnancy, if mom is eating these kinds of cereals and other foods, they actually lose working brain tissue. Imaging has been done of kids' brains who have the highest organophosphate levels. This was done in Salinas, California. The kids with the highest organophosphate levels literally had dead brain tissue. And
My wife has been a teacher for 20, 25 years now. And as she recounts what goes on in the classroom, I am struck by what you're describing, which is a progressive decline in the intellectual and psychological capacity of the kids. It's like a wave that continues to rise and rise and rise. Does anybody successfully avoid that because of the absolute proliferation of these chemicals everywhere?
yes, yes, many kids, millions of kids are growing up healthy.
That's good to
Um,
hear.
and what's happening is their parents are doing the things that I talk about in raising healthy kids, protecting your children from hidden chemical toxins. Mom will, before pregnancy, even a mom will be on a healthy diet that's largely organic. They will avoid using pesticides around the house, and increase their kids' risk of leukemia and brain cancer. So there are things that they will be doing in their diet. They will be careful about the kinds of cosmetic and personal care products they use. They may be using organic. We do have to do these things now, which we didn't have to do prior to the what I call the petrochemical revolution, which began after World War II. So yeah, kids can grow up healthy. The thing is, Mitch, is that a lot more kids, and these things happen by degrees and by degrees.
Mhm.
Like just as an example, look at global warming or global boiling. When we first began to recognize this in the 80s, we called it global warming. If you look at what we're calling it now, it's global boiling. Over the last 40 to 45 years, temperatures have increased, but it seemed to be happening very slowly. And now, as the Earth goes through these ginormous heat waves, what seemed to be happening incrementally, as they say that, now the pot is boiling.
Well,
Same with our kids in a society. When we, for example, are dumbing down our kids by putting all these pesticides into our food supply, or so many forever chemicals into our consumer products. And then we wonder why is there more societal dysfunction? Why does there seem to be a growing yearning for authoritarianism? Why is it that America is suffering a fertility crisis? Why is it that relationships, which are the bulwark of traditional order, seem to be changing? These things are happening incrementally. The media and so many people don't get that this is a neurobiological shift. They want to talk about the superficial things. I don't mean a shallow way, but if you dive deep into the subject, you realize we're shaving IQ points off of virtually every kid through our massive exposure to these chemicals. Rates of cancer among millennials and Gen Z are increasing again. So yeah, kids can grow up healthy, but overall, that's becoming a rarer thing. And overall, society is becoming dumbed down, more societally, more dysfunctional. And because you know what these chemicals are doing. And I spoke to Theo Colburn, who is the late Theo Colburn, who wrote Our Stolen Future, who was one of the first biologists to talk about these things in her book. And we see these things now happening. So, yeah, kids can be safe, but society as a whole is also suffering.
So, David, this is a very sobering conversation. I need to take a quick commercial break. We're going to be right back to continue the conversation. Let's continue the discussion about childhood in the 21st century with author and activist David Steinman, whose new book, Raising Healthy Kids, Protecting Your Children from Hidden Chemical Toxins, is out now. David, you've done a lot of work in Cancer Alley, which I think you've even described as a microcosm of the problem. Tell us about what's going on there and how the decisions we're making here at home are affecting the families that live there.
Cancer Alley is 85 miles of the Mississippi River between New Orleans and Baton Rouge. It has about 200 chemical plants, and it's considered the most industrialized corridor in the Western Hemisphere. I call it ground zero for everything that's going on in the environmental justice, anti-toxic, climate change. It's all right there. So, let's talk about things that you do that are healthy for you and that are healthy for others. When you buy a shampoo, Mitch, say, and I want folks to listening to look for this next time they're looking for a shampoo or a laundry detergent or a bubble bath or dish soap, you'll see ingredients on the worst brands like Tide, Procter and Gamble's products, Unilever's products. You'll see ingredients like sodium laureth sulfate or laureth 7. The key in what I'm saying is look for ingredients that have ETH in them, like laureth sulfate, myreth sulfate, and polyethylene glycol or PEG compounds. You'll see these listed on the label next time. Now, these are not good for you and your kids because products with these ingredients are likely to have a carcinogen, that is a chemical that causes cancer, called 1,4-dioxane. 1,4-dioxane is also an emerging groundwater contaminant. It contaminates the drinking water for millions of Americans, and it's costing communities all over the country millions of dollars to filter it out of the drinking water. It goes from your laundry detergent or your bubble bath into the wastewater stream, and it loves water, so it follows the groundwater right into your drinking water sources underground and contaminates them. As I said, it causes cancer. So if you're bathing your baby, say in a baby shampoo with these ingredients and baby bubble bath and some shampoos like these ones, the kids' characters that they like. It used to be Hello Kitty and Scooby-Doo when my kids were young, and the characters changed, the ingredients remain the same. You'll see these. Now, that's not good for your kid, but these chemicals are being made in Cancer Alley. The starting chemicals for them are being made in Cancer Alley. For example, all those ETH compounds require ethylene oxide.
Mm-hmm.
That's how they get what is called ethoxylated and are used in products. Well, when you do this in communities, whether you're in Illinois, Wisconsin, Louisiana, that EO escapes into the community air. EO is one of the most carcinogenic substances we know of. That's because medical personnel used to use it and still do. They used to use it without adequate protection. And people who were sterilizing medical equipment with EO were getting all sorts of cancers, particularly women, breast cancer. So we know that it's a very powerful carcinogen. But I mentioned those kids at the Fifth Ward School in the neoprene
Mm-hmm.
plant. But right next to the school, there's another plant. It's called Evonik. And that's where ethylene oxide is also being released. They're not safe for you or the kids in Cancer Alley. But when you buy organic products that avoid these ingredients, and there are some great brands that do, most of them you'll see they're certified organic or contain
Mm-hmm.
organic ingredients. You're protecting the kids in Cancer Alley too, and the community there. So your decisions have a very profound impact throughout the country. And that's really important for us, those of us who are adults in the room and care about this country and the people. We need to start thinking about more than just our family and understand that no kid is safe unless all kids are safe.
You're underscoring an important point too, which is the socioeconomic position of a family has a lot to do with their ability to avoid these chemicals. It's interesting. You mentioned that Cancer Alley ends in Baton Rouge, which is happens to be where I was born, and I think about the changes that have gone on there, but wondering whether or not some of those chemicals have touched me and my family, whether they're passed on through my parenting of my children. It's not easy to imagine getting out of this predicament if you're poor. What advice do you have for somebody who is on a limited income and doesn't have a lot of options in terms of the choices they make?
That's a great question because that's why I initially went down to Cancer Alley was to apply everything in my book to one of the poorest communities in the nation. Excuse me, to one of the poorest communities in the nation. Some people there may make as little as $15,000, $17,000 a year. And I also know, being an activist, Mitch, I know what it's like to live on a budget, or as I
Yeah.
put it, I know what it's like to live on no budget. We have to bust the myth that you can't do anything if you're poor. You can. And I'm not saying this in a blame the victim way. When I went down there, I just tried to share some of the things I knew. For example, just as an example, the water is so bad down there. There's some really big petrochemical plants right down there and right operating on Baton Rouge. One of the first things to know, for example, you can do this on any budget. And I'll just give you an example. One of the most important things mom and dad and any adult who cares about their health can do is to filter their drinking water. Now, I know when you say filter your water, the first thing people think about is, oh, well, how big a nut is that to crack? How much is that going to cost? Yeah, you can spend $1,000 on a home filtration system, but you know what? You can spend $30 and buy a faucet filter that fits right at the edge of on the end of your faucet and will filter about 85 to 90% of most contaminants out of your drinking water. Then, if you spend another 25 or $30 and get yourself a zero water pitcher filter,
Mm-hmm.
you know what? You'll filter out all of those forever chemicals. You'll filter out any fluoride that's been added to your drinking water, and fluoride's become a real issue again. Fluoride is added from the phosphate fertilizer industry, and it's reducing at high levels, it's reducing IQ in kids. It's also has carcinogenic properties. So I tell folks, you know what? This is not blame the victim, but just through a little extra knowledge, you can really do a good job of protecting yourself. Then they'll say, well, what about organic foods? Those are so expensive, David. I can't afford that. Guess
Mm-hmm.
what? Because of people like you and me who have been buying organic foods for 20 years, buying organic, even when there was no official program for organic, buying organic when it was really expensive. Today, when you go shopping, you can find the staples like lettuce, celery, carrots, potatoes, bread, all of the apples, all of these organic foods are about the same price as conventionally sourced, sometimes in season, even less. As we're recording, this is a great time of year for some of the summer fruit. Organic plums, peaches, nectarines are really cheap now. So I also, and you know what? I was in Cancer Alley, which is considered a food desert, and that area of the country. But if you go into the Winn-Dixie or the Walmart or the Rouse's, guess what? You'll find organic foods there too. So some of it is taking the blinders off and saying, yes, there are things you can do. It doesn't remedy everything, but let me give you another example from that area. The kids at that Fifth Ward school, who are being exposed to the ethylene oxide and the chloroprene, my nonprofit group, the Healthy Living Foundation, along with Ecos, the green cleaning company, and two other nonprofits in the area, brought down 32 high efficiency particulate air filters for every classroom and teacher space at the Fifth Ward School. We did that because if you can reduce the small particulate matter in the air, which these filters do really well, your kids' IQs improve, their breathing improves, their risk for cancer goes down. And again, if you may live in a really industrialized area, but for about $85, you can get one of these HEPA filters for your own home. So
Right.
I've talked about maybe spending $150 and doing a really good job of protecting yourself and your family.
That's encouraging. Now, the other end of this is that getting outdoors is good for kids, and parents need to balance those outdoor activities with the environmental pollutants that they might be surrounded by. Talk about getting the benefits of getting kids outside and how that changes their perspective, not just with regard to their health, but their perspective about other people.
That's such a, researchers are finding that one of the better, I hesitate to use the word cure, but let me use it here in an imprecise way. One of the better cures for example, ADHD is to get kids out in nature. So kids need nature. I have a whole chapter called Deep Caring, and it
Mhm.
talks about how parents can connect their kids back to the earth. When kids start to do their own gardens, when you take kids out on a hike, their whole attitude changes. And if you keep doing it, they change. So we do need to get kids out into nature. And I think that we're divorcing kids from nature in so many ways.
Yeah.
It's really important, for example, that schools bring nature into the classroom, and that is by having gardens, teaching kids to garden, to make their own food at school. I do that with my own kids. And sometimes, Mitch, when you're doing it with your kids, you'll go, well, is it really having an impact? Like I spent the teen years intervening in my kids' lives, buying them this product and that cosmetic so
Yeah.
that they wouldn't be harming themselves. And you go, well, are they really learning anything? And during the teen years, it might seem like they're not, but as they get older, just as an example, my daughter came home the other day with fast food, but she had listened to me some time ago and she went to a place called Shake Shack, which you can find all over the country.
Hmm.
She said, well, Dad, it's grass-fed beef. And guess what, Dad? The French fries are made from organic potatoes. So it's actually a pretty good choice. Getting kids out into nature is good for their brains, and it also helps to connect them to very important life processes.
At the same time, summer has become smoke season. What do we know at this point about the impact of wildfire smoke on children's health? We've talked with a couple of researchers who've been working on this, but what have you learned?
Oh yeah, that particulate matter reduces IQ, it increases their risk for cancer. If you live in, fire territory, whether it's in the Northwest or where California or wherever, studies have shown that during fire season and when there are fires, you really need that HEPA filter and to keep your windows closed because the particulate matter is very dangerous for kids' health, for their IQ. In fact, studies have shown that when mom uses a HEPA filter in highly polluted areas, controlled studies, versus moms who didn't use those filters, their kids have 2 or 3 more IQ points per kid, just by screening out all this fine particulate matter. So we are divorcing our kids from the earth, and it's dangerous. Another thing, Mitch, so many of our grass playing fields are being replaced with artificial turf, which contains substances from recycled tires, heavy metals, forever chemicals to increase the toughness of that turf. And in my book, I share the story about a soccer coach mom in the Northwest whose kids were playing soccer, and the goalies especially were coming down with various cancers. Why? Because They were playing on artificial turf, and goalies are in touch with the
Yeah, they're
earth,
diving
the
all the
turf,
time.
all of the time. So, there, and then we got to get them back to like the regular grass, but then we have to stop spraying that grass with 2,4-D and other herbicides because that's dangerous too. I'm
Yep.
not trying to create a quagmire. There are simple solutions like grass and don't spray it. And if it's got a little thatch and vetch in it, that's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect grass. It can be clover too. We're
Well,
such perfectionists in that way. Everyone sprays their lawn, so all they have is grass. I guess they don't want that proletariat clover and fetch that if you allow it to grow is just as soft and you don't need the herbicides.
particularly in the suburban world, that the lawn is your reputation, and that's a ridiculous basis for a social relationship, but it encourages so much chemical usage that it is actually potentially killing everybody in the neighborhood.
Oh, also the dogs.
Yeah.
Dogs, studies have shown that dogs from homes where their lawns are sprayed have higher rates of cancer too, because they're playing on that grass all of the time. So whether it's for you, your kids, or your pets, think about that. When you talk to your lawn care company, if they're using these chemicals like 2,4-D or malathion,
Mhm.
ask them to find it's very easy to do this with non-toxic methods and talk to them about that.
Yeah, I spent years trying to get that done, and I'd find that they would end up spraying what they told me they were going to stop spraying because they were just too lazy or cheap to make the change. It was stunning. So, David, we've just scratched the surface of what's in your book, and I encourage folks to read it. But going back to the first part of our conversation, what policy changes do you think are necessary to better protect children from environmental toxins in general, and how can parents get involved in the advocacy efforts to pass those laws?
Yeah, I have two words: zero tolerance. For too long, we have believed industry and government officials when they say, oh, 4 or 5 parts per billion lead, 2 or 3 parts per trillion of the forever chemicals. Those are safe. Don't worry about it. They're all below the EPA action levels. Don't worry about it. Zero tolerance. For you and your family, there is no safe exposure. We're talking about carcinogens. They'll
Yep.
get you at every level. They may get fewer people as the levels go down, but they'll get someone. So really zero tolerance. For too long, we've been way too easy on industry. I really believe in technology, whether it's, technology is what allows us to see if we've had cataracts. Technology in the medical field has saved the lives of so many people that I know. So I'm no Ned Ludd here. We need to have government, whether it's local, state, or federal, tell industry, like with these thousands of forever chemicals, they're banned. We're phasing them out. Come up with something safer now. If you don't say that and ban them, industry will take forever and may never come up with safer alternatives. But if you put the fire on them, if you apply the heat and say zero tolerance, they're banned, there is so much money and economic interest in coming up with safer chemicals. I find this too in Cancer Alley. All the public officials there are afraid to take on industry because they keep saying, well, if we make industry clean up their mess here in Cancer Alley, they're going to go to Texas, or they're going to go to Alabama. They're not going to go to Texas or Alabama. If Texas and Alabama take up zero tolerance too, it will be better for the economy and it will be better for our health. Industry can come up with safer alternatives. Talk about plastic. In writing my book, I visited a plant in Nebraska where they're making plastic with biofermentation, no petrochemicals. They're using corn
Yep.
and bacteria to make plastic, polylactic acid plastic. A lot of the disposable cups today that are compostable are made out of plant-based materials.
Right.
So zero tolerance is the first thing. Second thing is meaningful civil penalties.
Hmm.
When you're talking about a multi-billion dollar corporation and they get fined even $500,000, you know what they say? Cost of doing business. Let's
Right.
go on and do it the next day. We're still making enormous, ginormous profits. So meaningful civil penalties. Third aspect of writing meaningful legislation, citizen enforcement. Here in California, I'm what you call a citizen enforcer. There aren't many of us. There may be 100 in the nation. But what I do through the nonprofit, for which I'm chief officer, is take on companies like Procter and Gamble. We sued Herbal Essences, them for Herbal Essences and Pantene. I mentioned that those ethoxylated or ETH compounds, the level of dioxin in these products was really high. We sued them in court in California and got those levels reduced by over 90%. So zero tolerance, meaningful civil penalties, and citizen enforcement. We, the people, can enforce our laws, and we can do a lot better job often than our lackadaisical public officials.
David, a bracing answer to my question. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I encourage all of you listening to write a letter today to your congressperson, to your state legislator, and to your local legislators in order to get them just to focus on this question and answer whether or not they're going to take action. David, thanks so much for the time today. It's been fascinating.
Thanks, Mitch. Thank you. It's been great talking to you too.
We've been talking with author and longtime activist David Steinman about his new book, Raising Healthy Kids, Protecting Your Children from Hidden Chemical Toxins. And you can find the book at Amazon, on Powell Books, powells.com website, or your local bookstore. We'll include links to make that purchase in the article that goes with this podcast. Here's the picture we've ignored, literally looked away from as it has developed over the course of the past 70 to 90 years. Humans are awash in a soup of toxins that, whether measured in the parts per billion or tons in landfills and parks, is transforming our biology and killing more people every year. Cancer cases in people under 50 have increased by 79% between 1990 and 2019, according to several studies. And a research report published in Nature found that more than half of the cancers that they studied, 8 of 14 illnesses, were related to the digestive system. In other words, the things that we eat are making the biggest difference to our long-term health. Highly processed foods and many apparently natural products that are sprayed with pesticides and herbicides not disclosed on labeling are making us sick. David explained that parents can be diligent on a budget, so consider adding a water filter on your faucet and filtering the air in your home. These are inexpensive options available to almost all families. And do try to choose organic produce at the grocery store if you can. And if you can't, ask for organic food. Ask for it at the right price. We, as consumers, do shape what we are presented as options when shopping. It's important for us to take action. The regenerative agriculture movement does represent a potential path out of this toxicological disaster, but it's on each of us to take these actions. Please consider writing a letter. If you need a source of information to cite in your letter to a legislator, take a few hours and read David's book, Raising Healthy Kids. And here's another step you can take. Please spread the word by sharing this podcast or any of the more than 490 interviews that we've produced on sustainability in your ear. Folks, by writing a review on your favorite podcast platform, you'll help your neighbors find us. You are the amplifiers that can spread more ideas that create less waste. Please tell your friends, family, your coworkers, the people you meet on the street that they can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, or any of the fine purveyors of podcast goodness they may prefer. Thanks, folks, for your support. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. This is Sustainability in Your Ear, and we will be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.